May 27, 1940. The French village of Lepanet near Dunkirk sits shrouded in pre-dawn fog, and Lieutenant John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill stands at the edge of a collapsed barn, stringing a 6-foot-long English yew longbow. Around him, 47 British soldiers from the Manchester Regiment crouch in the rubble, clutching their Lee Enfield rifles and checking ammunition counts that all tell the same grim story. They are out of options. A German patrol numbering at least 80 men has encircled their position in the darkness, cutting off every route of retreat back to the British lines. The Germans are 200 yards away and closing, moving with the confidence of hunters who have cornered their prey. Churchill knocks a 30-inch arrow fletched with goose feathers, draws the bowstring to his ear, and exhales slowly through his teeth. His commanding officer had laughed 3 hours earlier when Churchill refused to abandon his bow during the retreat. "What are you going to do, Churchill?" the major had sneered. "Shoot them with arrows like Robin Hood?" Now, as the first German silhouette appears through the mist, Churchill releases the string. The arrow travels at 160 feet per second, crosses the distance in less than 2 seconds, and strikes the lead German soldier in the chest with enough force to punch through his uniform and sternum. The man collapses without a sound. Churchill is already knocking his second arrow, but before he can draw, the Manchester men open fire with their rifles, and the German patrol scatters into the fog. By dawn, Churchill's unit has broken through the encirclement and reached British lines, and John Churchill has earned a distinction that will stand unchallenged for the rest of human history. He has recorded the last confirmed longbow kill in modern warfare. But this morning, in May 1940, is only the beginning of Mad Jack Churchill's war. The longbow had been militarily obsolete for more than 300 years. When Jack Churchill picked one up in 1939, the weapon that had decided battles at Crécy and Agincourt in the 14th and 15th centuries had been rendered useless by the invention of firearms that required less training, could be reloaded faster, and possessed vastly superior range and penetration. By the time the First World War introduced machine guns, artillery, and poison gas to the battlefield, the idea of using a bow and arrow in combat was not just outdated, it was laughable, bordering on suicidal. The British Army's standard-issue Lee Enfield rifle could fire 10 rounds per minute at an effective range of 600 yards. A skilled archer with a longbow could manage perhaps 12 arrows per minute at best, with an effective range against an armored target of maybe 150 yards. The math was brutal and decisive. A rifleman with iron sights and a week of training could outshoot an archer who had trained for years. Churchill's fellow officers viewed his insistence on carrying a longbow as either an elaborate joke or a dangerous eccentricity. The weapon had no place in modern warfare. They argued. It was a relic, a toy, a piece of Renaissance fair cosplay that had wandered onto a 20th century battlefield. Military doctrine emphasized firepower, rate of fire, and combined arms tactics involving tanks, artillery, and air support. There was no chapter in any army manual that addressed what to do when a lieutenant insisted on bringing medieval weaponry to a firefight. But Jack Churchill was not a man who cared about doctrine, convention, or what other people thought was sensible. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born in Hong Kong on September 16, 1906. The son of a British civil engineer working in the Far East. He attended King William's College on the Isle of Man and later graduated from the Royal Military College at Sandhurst in 1926, earning a commission in the Manchester Regiment. But Churchill was never a typical officer. By the mid-1930s, he had left active duty to pursue a bewildering variety of civilian careers that included professional modeling, work as a newspaper editor, and a brief stint as an actor in a Hollywood film. He was also an accomplished archer who had represented Britain in the World Archery Championships in 1939. where he used a traditional English longbow, not the modern recurve bows most competitors favored, but a 6-foot length of yew wood shaped and tillered in the same manner as the bows carried at Agincourt in 1415. Churchill was fascinated by the weapon not because it was practical, but because it was difficult. The longbow required immense upper body strength, years of practice to master, and an almost meditative focus to shoot accurately under pressure. It was, in Churchill's view, the weapon of a warrior, not a soldier. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, Churchill immediately rejoined the army and reported for duty with his longbow slung across his back. His superiors were baffled. His fellow officers made jokes. The men in his platoon exchanged glances and wondered if their new lieutenant was entirely sane. But Jack Churchill had no intention of explaining himself. He simply showed up every morning at dawn, strung his bow, and practiced. The German invasion of France in May 1940 gave Churchill his first opportunity to prove that his medieval weapon was more than a curiosity. During the chaotic retreat toward Dunkirk, Churchill's unit was repeatedly harassed by German patrols probing the British lines. On the morning of May 27th, his company was ambushed and surrounded near the village of L'Épinette. The situation was desperate. The British were outnumbered, low on ammunition, and cut off from reinforcements. Standard procedure in such a scenario was to surrender or attempt a breakout that would likely result in heavy casualties. Churchill chose a third option. He ordered his men to hold their fire, move to a forward position with a clear line of sight, and engage the German patrol with his longbow. The first arrow killed a German sergeant at a range of approximately 120 yards, a shot that Churchill later described as straightforward in his typically understated manner. The psychological effect of the kill was far greater than its tactical impact. The German patrol, expecting rifle fire, instead witnessed one of their men drop dead from an arrow that seemed to materialize out of the fog. The confusion bought Churchill's men enough time to open fire with their rifles, break the encirclement, and escape. The longbow kill was confirmed by multiple witnesses, including Churchill's commanding officer, who stopped laughing about the bow after that morning. But Churchill's real talent was not marksmanship. It was understanding that warfare, beneath all its technology and tactics, remained a contest of human will, and that an enemy who did not understand what was happening was already halfway to defeat. In 1941, Churchill volunteered for the newly formed British Commandos, an elite special operations unit designed for raids behind enemy lines. The Commandos were a perfect fit for a man who viewed war as a form of performance art. Churchill reported for training with his longbow, a Scottish broadsword he had purchased from an antique dealer, and a set of bagpipes he had learned to play during his years as a civilian. His fellow commandos thought he was insane. Their commanding officer threatened to confiscate the weapons as a distraction. Churchill responded by volunteering for every dangerous mission on offer and performing so effectively that his eccentricities became legendary rather than ridiculous. On December 27, 1941, Churchill led a commando raid on the German garrison at Vågsøy, Norway, as part of Operation Archery. The objective was to destroy German fish oil factories, capture prisoners for intelligence purposes, and generally cause as much chaos as possible before withdrawing. Churchill landed on the beach at the head of his unit, playing March of the Cameron Men on his bagpipes, while German machine guns opened fire from bunkers overlooking the shoreline. He charged the nearest bunker with his broadsword drawn, lobbed grenades through the firing slits, and personally led the assault that cleared the position. His men followed him, not because they thought his tactics were sound, but because no one wanted to be the soldier who hesitated while their commanding officer was storming a Nazi bunker with a sword and bagpipes. The raid was a resounding success. Churchill's unit destroyed 4 factories, captured nearly 100 German prisoners, and inflicted significant casualties before withdrawing with minimal losses. Churchill himself was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his leadership, though the official citation made no mention of the bagpipes or the broadsword. But the story spread through the commando units like wildfire, and John Churchill acquired a new nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life: Mad Jack. In July 1943, Churchill and his commandos landed on the beaches of Sicily as part of the Allied invasion of Italy. The Germans were dug in along the coast with machine gun nests, artillery, and minefields designed to turn the beach into a killing ground. Churchill hit the sand at the head of his men, bagpipes wailing, sword in hand, and led a charge directly into the German positions. It should have been suicide. Instead, it was overwhelming. Churchill and a single corporal captured an entire German observation post, taking 42 prisoners using nothing but the sword, the element of surprise, and Churchill's absolute refusal to behave like a sane human being. The German soldiers, confronted by a British officer wielding a medieval sword and playing bagpipes while his men poured fire into their positions, simply surrendered. Churchill's own account of the incident was typically deadpan. "I maintain that any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed," he said later. The 42 prisoners were marched back to British lines, and Churchill was awarded a bar to his Distinguished Service Order. His superiors were running out of medals to give him, and his men were running out of adjectives to describe him. But Churchill's luck was about to run out. In May 1944, his unit was ordered to capture a German observation post on the island of Brač off the coast of Yugoslavia. The mission went badly from the start. Churchill's commandos were ambushed by German reinforcements, and after hours of fighting, Churchill found himself and 6 of his men surrounded in a bombed-out house with no ammunition left. Churchill ordered his men to surrender, then picked up his sword and charged the German positions alone. He managed to kill several Germans before a grenade exploded near him, knocking him unconscious. When he woke, he was a prisoner of war. Churchill was transported to Sachsenhausen concentration camp in Germany, one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the Nazi system. His captors assumed that a British officer of his rank would be kept there until the end of the war. They did not account for the fact that Jack Churchill viewed captivity as a temporary inconvenience. In September 1944, after 5 months of observing guard patterns, he and a Royal Air Force officer escaped through a drain tunnel during an electrical blackout. They walked more than 100 miles through occupied Germany before being recaptured near the Baltic coast. Churchill was transferred to a POW camp in Austria, which he regarded as an insult to his abilities. In April 1945, with Allied forces closing in and the camp guards abandoning their posts, Churchill walked out the front gate, located a nearby German artillery unit, and convinced them to surrender to him personally. He then commandeered a motorcycle and rode to the nearest American position, arriving just in time to learn that Germany had surrendered. Churchill was furious. "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks," he complained to anyone who would listen, "we could have kept this war going for another 10 years. He had hoped to be transferred to the Pacific to fight the Japanese, but the war ended before he could deploy. His comment became one of the most famous quotes attributed to any soldier in the Second World War, and it perfectly captured the mind of a man who viewed war not as a tragedy to be endured, but as the only occupation worth pursuing. After the war, Jack Churchill returned to Britain a decorated hero with the Distinguished Service Order and Bar, the Military Cross, and a reputation that bordered on mythical. He never gave interviews about his wartime exploits, dismissing questions with the observation that any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. In 1948, he parachuted into Jerusalem as part of British operations during the Arab-Israeli conflict, making him one of the few soldiers in history to have fought in 3 separate wars across 3 decades. He retired from the military in 1959 and spent his later years surfing off the coast of Australia, riding trains across Europe, and occasionally showing up at archery competitions with his longbow to remind younger archers what real marksmanship looked like. He died in 1996 at the age of 89, having lived long enough to see his wartime stories dismissed as exaggerations or outright fabrications by historians who could not reconcile the image of a man charging Nazis with a sword and bagpipes with the sanitized narrative of modern warfare. But the records are clear, the witnesses are numerous, and the longbow kill at Lepinette in May 1940 remains, to this day, the last confirmed combat use of a longbow in the history of warfare. Jack Churchill did not carry medieval weapons into battle because he was insane, or because he craved attention, or because he misunderstood the nature of modern war. He carried them because he understood something that his contemporaries had forgotten. Warfare, stripped of its technology and doctrine, is a human endeavor, and the warrior who refuses to be predictable, who attacks when reason says to retreat, who plays bagpipes when logic demands silence. That warrior holds an advantage that no amount of firepower can eliminate. The Germans at Lepinette did not die because arrows are superior to bullets. They died because they hesitated, because they did not understand what they were facing, and because in that moment of confusion, Jack Churchill seized the initiative and never let go. The lesson of Mad Jack Churchill is not that medieval weapons are effective in modern war. The lesson is that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield is the warrior who refuses to accept that the war must be fought according to someone else's rules.